Welcome back to an episode of I'm Glad You're Here. I'm your host, Molly, and today's episode is with Aya Allison, who is a microdosing educator. This is an episode that demystifies, unpacks, and educates you on the power of working with psilocybin, a plant medicine. I think there's so many beautiful tangents within this conversation that remind us that this is a plant. This is part of nature. This is part of a life cycle process. The idea of microdosing actually offers us the opportunity to sync with the rhythm of nature. So with that, I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's get to it. Okay, Aya, welcome to I'm Glad You're Here. It is an honor to have you to talk about microdosing and mindset coaching, and just feel so excited to dive into this with you.
Molly, thank you. I really appreciate you creating this space to help educate and help people feel more empowered about these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. And when we've talked in the past, I love the way that you demystify, debunk, make it so clear. And I can't wait to do that with you today, to just get to the bottom, get to the root, explain what's going on here and how this medicine is really useful and helpful.
Thank you. And thank you for setting that intention of what we're going to get into, because there is a lot of confusion around microdosing itself. So wherever you want to get started, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, let's hit the ground running. So first, just in having this recording, I've had a lot of friends and community members ask, like, what is microdosing? So maybe let's start there.
Absolutely. So microdosing is taking a sub-perceptive, so it means you don't feel it, you don't have an awareness of it, just like your multivitamin, amount of a typically psychedelic substance. So whether that's psilocybin, LSD, there's many things that you can microdose. And the idea is that you're getting the support without any sort of visuals or a feeling.
Got it. And for clarity, for those listening, what types of medicine do you coach? And are we kind of talking about?
The focus with my work is psilocybin, right? People know them as like magic mushrooms. I don't want to make it not sound fun, but I kind of take the magic out of the mushrooms, because magic mushrooms, is the thing that the feds put into place to scare everyone. And the beauty of this and the demystifying aspect is that you don't need to have a magic sort of experience, like a profoundly visual experience, to have supreme benefit from microdosing.
Got it. And that was what I wanted to ask next, was this sub-perceptive space. What exactly does that feel like? How does one connect when they're taking a sub-perceptive dose?
So similarly to going to the gym, right? You go to the gym and it's not like all of a sudden you're just buff, right? It's a relationship. It's a commitment. It's a process over time. So we're looking at a natural sort of process, as opposed to things that, we're trained to as Westerners, which is like, buy it now, quick fix now, I want it now. That is not the way of nature. And the beauty of microdosing is you're building a relationship, not just with this protocol, but with yourself. So there are these slow, steady changes happening over time. And the protocol that my company has studied is a 12 to 24 week protocol. And this is an every other day protocol. So this is a nice, it's a 3 to 6 month relationship that you are cultivating with psilocybin.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And I love that you said, things take time. This is incremental change. This is connecting with the medicine. Very different than what we think when we're taking Advil and we're like, I have a headache. I need something right now. And I need this to just get rid of my symptom. We're working long-term, building the relationship, cultivating, and that's the way that nature works. I think it's really beautiful to highlight that this is a really natural process because we're working with earth ingredients.
Thank you, for pointing that out, because yes, we are. And when we work with nature, we are actually working with ourselves, because the idea is that, with Mother Gaia, we as humans are almost like this fruiting body of the earth, right? And we have
Oh,
such
yeah.
a disconnect from that idea, especially when you introduce technology, when you introduce pharma, when you introduce Amazon, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
now, I get it now. I have it now. All these screens in front of me now, now, now. That is the antithesis of nature. Nature is not now. A baby grows in 9 months. A tree may grow over, hundreds of years. Even,
Right.
mycelial structures grow over thousands of years. Yeah, so in this way, humans getting things now, that is not human, and it's not humane, and it's not sustainable.
Yeah. Wow. Mic drop moment. And so with that, because there's also, working with psychedelic, psilocybin in a bigger journey, in a bigger setting. I'm curious, now that we're talking about this slow change and microdosing, how those compare, how they work well, kind of they're the same medicine, but different potencies and different ways of using them. So I'm curious how they kind of weave together.
I have this idea that microdosing is the new macrodose, right? Because this is also, when we think about the like get it now syndrome, I have no problem with microdosing at all. It can be extremely helpful. But one of the things that can be even more beneficial is creating a relationship first with a microdose protocol
Mm.
before going into a macrodose journey or setting, right? Because you already have this understanding, you have this sense of empowerment. There's less fear and there's less expectation. I think what I
Yeah.
see in my work is a lot of people are like, fix me. It's like, first of all, you don't need to be fixed. You just need a perspective shift. Okay. So nobody needs fixing.
Yeah, beautiful.
What those types of journeys do, they're going to adjust your perspective. And if you aren't ready to have your perspective adjust with a macrodose, you could feel pretty disturbed and shattered, right? Now some people are
Totally.
all about that, but to me it's more of it's a masculine way, and this feminine
Mhm.
way is the more gentle, subtle, build the relationship microdosing approach. Now I'm not saying one is
Yeah.
better or none of those things. It's just considering, what do you want as an outcome, and what is your intention around these experiences? Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about microdosing, it's being patient. It's trusting a process, and it's also getting to know yourself slowly, because
Yeah.
microdosing is creating neuroplasticity over time. Okay. So instead of all of a sudden it's like, wow, I had a 6, 8 hour journey and like my mind is blown. What if you actually spent the time subtly reshifting and reshaping and repatterning? And then what you're doing is you're integrating all of the learning along the way. Right. So for some
Yeah.
people, it's like, oh, I just took like 5 grams of mushrooms and it's like, my mind is blown. Okay. But what if you have the structure and the capacity and the inner understanding to be able to take what you learn, integrate it and implement it and activate it?
Yeah. Oh, you just touched on so much. Wow. Amazing. I want to dive into the neuroscience behind this and the brain plasticity and what's kind of going on under the cover, and why this medicine works the way it does. I also wanted to touch on that idea that people can go on these big trips and have a really bad experience because Michael Pollan talks about mindset and setting. And if you're not really creating that intention and you're like, yeah, let me just deep dive and see what comes up, and that's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. It's going to be trippy, and then walk away really distorted and really disturbed and unsure how to integrate, really overwhelmed. And so, anyone that I've spoken to that's kind of cautious about microdosing is really hesitant because of those potential disturbing realizations. And I'd love for you to touch more on that, how you could in the past have had a bad experience with a macrodose. That doesn't mean that microdosing is off the table for you.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating when people relate their experiences about that time in college when I had that bad trip, I'm like, oh, that's great. Microdosing is none of that. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, okay, now that we've shared that, let's know that microdosing is the opposite. Now, I'm not going to say things can't come up, but they can come up in a much more manageable way because your entire consciousness isn't shifted into another dimension that you are unfamiliar with. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, microdosing is bringing heightened states of awareness, right? But slowly over time. So yes, you will become more aware of what's going on in your life. And for some people with microdosing, that can be uncomfortable, but it's the beauty of having a coach guiding you. So when things come up, we
Mm-hmm.
look at it, we reframe it, and we use it to empower us, right? We use it as an opportunity. We use it as a tool for learning, right? So with this slow, gradual process, there's a lot of empowerment. And if you've put those structures into place, then you can go into a microdose and you know that there's no quote unquote bad trips, right? It's just information. Now, I'm not going to say it isn't intense. It still can be extremely intense, but you've had so much time to put the structures into place to go in and surrender, right? When you're going
Yeah.
into a microdose and you have all this ego buildup and people talk about ego death, it's like, but you don't have to have one. Or you may have one, but you've been working towards it and kind of welcoming it as opposed to like serious resistance. And again, that's
Mm-hmm.
where I see it's like, okay, well, why don't we optimize, right? Optimize for best outcomes. And so with the micro dosing, you could be working towards a macro experience and you have
Yeah.
so much more information within yourself and understanding and awareness that you are saying, I welcome the opportunity to surrender.
Yeah, yeah, that surrender piece is huge, and it's that holding on, and especially when you're going on a big journey but you have so much resistance, that's where that darkness kind of comes from, because you're trying to stop a process and that fear and everything, and then it gets heightened and it's in that altered state of consciousness where you're not comfortable. And yeah, that brings up a lot. I think it's a cool metaphor. To me, microdosing feels like kind of slowly opening a door and seeing, the little things that come out and kind of making peace with it or bringing it into your life. And then a macrodose would be like busting that door open fully. And so I see what you're saying. A microdose really helps. It lets you see what's kind of seeping out of that door, out of that room. And then you can be ready to really bust it open. And that doesn't mean you can't go on a journey until you've done a microdose. It just means if you're more hesitant of what's going to come up with a big journey, maybe that's not the first route you take. And that's all. And so going to the neuroscience piece and what's happening internally, I'd love for you to touch on with a microdose, how that's integrating with our brain, our neurons, and changing our landscape in there.
So I just to be clear, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I studied all the research that's out there. And what we're really looking at, just to keep it pretty simple, is we have dysregulation in our nervous system. And so our central nervous system is what can kind of controls everything in our body, and you can have all of these symptoms that come up as a sign of dysregulation, whether that's anxiety or depression or ADHD or feeling of malaise, of separation. This all of these symptoms that we see that are so common, let's just say globally, but I'll just as an American, in American society, we have all of those things happening as a result of this dysregulation of the central nervous system. And so what psilocybin specifically does, it begins to slowly, if you're doing a microdosing protocol, re-regulate, right? So it's slowly adjusting through the re-regulation of the central nervous system, but also going into the brain and activating more of the prefrontal cortex, right? Prefrontal is where we call it like executive brain, right? It's like, this is where we make loving, logical decisions, because when you have that correlation between the vagus nerve and the brain, you have that heart-mind connection, right? And so psilocybin is going to help strengthen that connection. So instead of being in the limbic brain, in the monkey mind, in the reactionary brain, you're going into that loving and rational part of the brain where you can be more non-attached. Now, that doesn't mean detached. Non-attachment is seeing a situation and not letting it control you, but controlling yourself, which is always our goal, self-mastery. So when we're able to go in and love ourselves and self-soothe and not blame and be a victim and feel small, like all of those things is what a dysregulated nervous system looks like. And it comes out in a multitude of symptoms, and everyone's experiencing it. And so the beauty in going through the microdosing journey is you have a slow reconfiguration of these symptoms. So sometimes people are going to notice like, that thing that always used to be so annoying, and like, you don't really think about it anymore. And again, that's the beauty of this slow, subtle process where we're slowly adjusting as opposed to our egos getting flared and resisting.
Yeah. And what's so special too is that you're still going about your day. You can drive, you can take a meeting. You're not in a different universe. You're very much present with that sub-perceptive twist. It's a little creative burst. It's a slight alteration, but you can talk perfectly and you can go about your day just fine. I think that's that piece, because it helps you go a little bit more internal, but you're still showing up to the world. So you can really integrate in action and see how these things might have bothered you before and have a different perspective. Like, oh, that's where that comes from. Okay, I'm good now. Or that keeps coming up and you still you work through it over the duration of a protocol.
And you said something interesting, is that you kind of welcome it, right? You look at it and you're like, oh, that's what that is. So there's a deeper understanding as opposed to this rejection, the fear, the control, the pushing it away, right? It's kind of like, I see you there. Okay. Oh, I understand that. And so it's having this compassion and understanding. And also with a microdose, typically people actually have more clarity than usual because a lot of the noise of anxiety or overthinking is actually turned down. Many people have actually gone on microdosing protocols to get off of Adderall or Vyvanse. So for people who have ADHD, it might sound a little confusing, but we're demystifying. Micro amounts of psilocybin actually many cases can improve focus.
Wow, incredible. And that's a great point. Are there any populations that this medicine would not work well for?
People have epilepsy. That is the number one, or let's say schizophrenia, right? And again, this is not medical advice, but just based on the findings of communities that I'm personally involved with who do, I will say it's not published research yet, but there is, with that re-regulation of the central nervous system, because of the roots of epilepsy and the neurobiology of it, which again, it is not my realm of expertise, it can trigger seizures for people who have had a history of them in the past, even though it's slowly regulating, it's contraindicated.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity. And to shift into this question with different protocols and dosage, I feel like, can we get some clarity on why there are so many differences and what's going on?
So everyone is different, right? The way someone goes out into the sun and it's like, oh, they could be out in it for hours, they're good. Someone else goes out for 20 minutes, they're already starting, to really feel it. It's affecting them. We're all different how we take in, let's just say, information. And so with that, there can be sort of a foundational dosage, which is looked at to be around 50 milligrams or 0.05 grams. It's a very small amount when you think about 5 grams being sort of like that heroic dose, or, for some people, that's not even a heroic dose. So if 5 grams is a psychedelic dose, we're talking about 50 milligrams. Okay, so it's quite small. That over an every other day 12-week period has shown to create significant neuroplasticity for a significant, let's say, 90% of people who take it. There are people, if they are taking significant SSRIs, maybe have different types of brain trauma, have significant amounts of trauma, period. There's a very, very, very small population who sometimes they need a little bit more to notice the neuroplasticity changing. For what reason, we don't know. We don't have the research yet. And so that could be something like 250 milligrams, right? 5 times as much, but still a very small amount. When you think about it's like a 12th or 15th of a psychedelic dose. Still with that 250, psilocybin is in the system for 24 hours. So there's always a space in between the days because it's still working. There are definitely old school protocols that are like 4 days on, 3 days up. I personally don't understand that fully because psilocybin is active in the system. So in some ways, we've always thought about less is more, and we want to be respectful of what we use. So it's like, okay, it's already active in your system. The every other day gives your brain the opportunity to kind of absorb everything fully. And then, you take the next dose.
I love that. And again, it's let the medicine do its work. We're not we're not pounding this medicine. It's let it sit, let it do its wonders. And so something that I've heard, if you do it every single day, then your body gets used to it. And is there kind of a weaning off period? If you take quote unquote too much, does it stop working for you entirely?
This is a great question. And it also brings up a point about psilocybin. Psilocybin is actually anti-addictive. Okay. So it can very much help people who have addictions, whether it's significant drugs. It definitely helps people with like alcohol, smoking, etc. But to your point, if you took it every day, your body would build up a tolerance so quickly that the dosage would no longer be working just within a few weeks. I'm a full believer in microdosing because I've seen the results, but you will build the tolerance quickly to psilocybin, which is what makes it great because you cannot get addicted to it. Right. And so with that, it's actually, people ask me about this. They're like, oh, do I do this for the rest of my life? It's like, absolutely not. Right. Because once you've reached a certain point, it's almost like the mushrooms are going to tell you like, okay, you're good.
We're done here.
Right. Like you don't keep a cast on your arm forever. That's the thing. A natural process and a natural cycle has a beginning and an end. Now you might decide, hey, I microdosed for, let's say 24 weeks. I took a break. In a year, I'm going to microdose again, or maybe in 6 months, but you had some time off to kind of think about where you want to go next. And it can be a relationship or more like a lifestyle, let's say. Again, it's kind of like people aren't going to run marathons all the time, but it's like, every couple of beers or maybe once a year, something like that. So you don't need to do this constantly. And again, your brain is going to a new state. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to lose everything. Now, I will say disclaimer on that. For older people who are experiencing onset of something like dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., those are the exceptions where I would say something ongoing can be helpful. And I've seen the stories of people who are in their 80s who were beginning to have dementia, who started microdosing, who really just came back to life.
That's
But when
amazing.
they stopped, and that was only over like a 2 month period, it wasn't like the full 12 to 24 weeks, there was signs again of sort of the withdrawal. So it could be when people are at a certain phase of their life, the brain may need that support. But again, it's still inconclusive. But that is the only disclaimer on the, ongoing with microdosing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I like that you used marathon training because I've done a few half marathons. I did one full marathon about a year and a half ago. And after I did it, I thought to myself, like, okay, yeah, now I'm a marathoner. I'm just going to do this all the time. But my body wanted rest. And I have not really brought a running practice back in since then. I've done a little bit here and there, but when I was training, of course, I did my long runs. I did an 18-mile run, a 22-mile run, something that's not sustainable for me to do every single day. I did it once a week and built up to it. Then I did my marathon. And then I thought to myself, okay, I'm kind of good for now. Like I got what I needed out of it. I'm proud of myself. I'm good. I'm going to do some yoga, stretch, feel good, go on walks, relax a bit. When I want to do another marathon, I will. I know it's there. I can sign up for any of them. They're all over the world. Maybe a cooler place this time, like Iceland. That'd be fun. But it sounds really similar. I like that cast too. It's support for what you need, and it gives you that perspective shift. And now go and live your life. Go be the best version of you can be with that medicine's assistance.
All right. And go and share, right? I mean, that's the beauty of this. Just like the mycelium, once you have such a powerful experience, it's like, go share it,
Yeah.
because I think in these experiences, as we realize, like, wow, I actually do know how to support myself. That's all this is. It's just a support system when you need it. And once you
Mhm.
feel empowered, that ability to share and be of service to others becomes so, supportive, right? You were supportive, maybe you become the support by sharing. And then you sort of
Yeah.
pass that support on to someone else. I talk about this as like hidden knowledge, which is what I love. And it's been purposefully suppressed and a lot of terror and vilified, cast onto it. And so I feel when people get into those states of feeling so empowered and they're like, hey, I'm good, go help someone else who might need the same experience that you had.
That's so beautiful. And to be so honest, that's exactly how I've felt going through my own protocol. I'm like, the people that need this need this. Wow. And because you do a lot of this coaching and people come to you with questions, I'm curious if you can think of a few of the questions people come to you, like, can this help me in this area, or what they're working through, just to throw some ideas out there for people listening that are like, what would this be useful for?
Thank you for asking this question because I think a lot of people kind of do wonder, like, is this for me? And who is it
Hmm.
for? It's really interesting because it's for people who want to go to a next level within themselves. And when I say a next level, it could be a deeper sense of learning about oneself, but also an expanding of your own natural repressed abilities that the outside world or the matrix has told you to box up to stay small. So I work with a lot of high performers. Okay. I work with artists, creatives, entrepreneurs. I work with people that, they're like, okay, well, I'm supposed to do this at this level and I'm supposed to show this and these things. I'm supposed to. So
Mm.
with microdosing, this is you learning how to be expansive in more of a flow state in your authenticity, not what the matrix
Yeah.
told you to do, not what your parents told you to do, not what your peers, it's like, oh, I need to be like this person. It's like, oh, I'm so far behind. It rids you of that external BS and it lets you
Yeah.
listen to your internal wisdom, to be your true self and to not care. And it isn't in
Mhm.
this detached way, but it is in this way of loving truth, right? It gets you
Yeah.
into the deeper levels of yourself, which to me is the next level, right? Your
Yeah.
wisdom is within. And when you go through this process of tapping into that, it's like all of the nonsense can be going on outside of you. But when you listen to that true inner wisdom, it's powerful. And there's a reason why institutions don't want you to listen to that, because a wise, happy, calm society is very difficult to control.
Wow. Yeah. Ooh. I want to throw this in here before we break down the institutional control over this medicine. And that is, wow, I'm just taking that in because it's so powerful, first of all, that this is a crazy deconditioning tool. Just amazing. And so the question I have for you, I'm thinking of how to phrase it, because another thing I'm thinking through that makes people hesitant is, oh, but this tool isn't just me and my body. It's a medicine in me. And so I'm curious from your perspective how you can explain how much of it is you, how much of it is the medicine. How does that work together to build this harmony?
Thank you so much for asking this question, because when people think about it as a crutch, right? People are like, oh, I can do it myself. It's like, can you go without food? Right? Can you go without water? You always need something. And for people to say, you know what, I do need this support, that's powerful. That's vulnerability. Yeah. And no one's saying you need to eat all day. I mean, you need to eat throughout your life, right? But there's plenty of monks that go on like years and years and years long fasts. I mean, our body has the ability to do wild things. But at the end of the day, when you are taking this in, I tell people to think of it more as just a support system, right? And that's why I go back to sort of like the cast, right? It's something that is supporting you for a period, right? And with that, that's part of the surrender. Like, again, especially as Americans, we're conditioned to be like independent, do our thing, and like, I do this stuff by myself, and I don't need help.
Push through,
push really hard, grind. Like, oh my God, that's such BS. The truth is that nature is an ecosystem just like we are, and we're being told and we're being conditioned to stay separated, to stay separate from ourselves, to stay separate from communities, to stay separate from the help and support that we all need. We all need. And to be able to vocalize that and to not vilify that is very powerful.
Yes, the passion in this work. And I was thinking of this earlier when we're talking about mycelium, and it's literally a network. And this is what we're talking about. You go to friends for support. You have some tea for some comfort. We're not doing everything alone. And I love just thinking we eat food to stay alive. Our body's a vessel we need to support. We sleep because we can't be up every second of every day. So I love that. It's a full-on mycelium network integration of sorts, and we're just picking the tools that we need for what we're going through.
Right, and that's the thing. Once people have a better understanding of what this tool is and what it can do, it begins to, sort of coalesce, and it's like, oh, wait a second, this is actually meaningful to me because I see it solving this pain point for me. Once the pain point is solved, you can stop because you're no longer in pain.
Yeah. Ooh, I think we're ready to break down this control system and why it's so taboo, why it's so hard to connect with, and this whole gray area of decriminalizing, criminalizing this medicine.
This could be the entire podcast. However, what I'll try to do is just like keep it as succinct as possible and stay sitting down because it could really go on a tangent with it, how much this disgusts me. However, what's great is that we're all waking up and this information must be shared. We have to go back in history a little bit. People, please pay attention to what's happened in history before, because if you ignore history, you will repeat it. Okay, so I beg of everyone who's listening to this, see Judas and the Black Messiah. It was a great film that came out a few years ago. It talks about the infiltration of the Black Panthers of an FBI informant. Okay. And so J. Edgar Hoover back in 1969 was on a rampage to destroy the Black communities, the powerful communities that were coming up that were super organized. The Black Panthers were incredibly influential. They were organized. They were supporting their communities. They were empowering. They were offering like free children's lunches and these education programs. The war movement, also the anti-war movement, was also gaining power. Students were organizing, protests were happening. Like, people were like, we don't stand for this. Okay. And so when you talk about like the military industrial complex, is like, whoa. We've got these hippies that are getting all this attention. We've got these Black people actually empowering their communities. And let's be clear, this wasn't a race. It wasn't just Black people. This was poorer people, lower middle class people, because it wasn't just, Black people that came, to these organizations and marches and rallies. There were all kinds of people who came, because the Black Panthers were very inclusive to a large degree to anyone who wanted to come and stand up against basically the feds. Right? Mm-hmm. Because this is about empowerment. It's about people coming together, right? It's the connection and having a true belief in what you deserve as a human, right? You do deserve to live in peace. You do deserve to chase your dreams. You do deserve those things. And, we live in this free society, but it's completely manipulated. We're all manipulated by media. And so, when the Black Panthers were getting super organized, that sent the feds into a tailspin. And J. Edgar Hoover was just like, it's not guns that are dangerous. It's free children's lunches, right? It's the free children's breakfast. It's these Black Panthers that are like getting super organized and actually growing and strengthening their communities. They're like, we can't have that. So he formed this very specific faction of the FBI. They got people to infiltrate the Panthers. And, they had these informants that were studying everything and finding out. I mean, Fred Hampton was assassinated because an informant came in and let the FBI know all the moves that they were making. And with that, it was everything to completely destroy and disrupt these communities that were becoming so empowered. So what you would see is at a lot of, whether it was like the war protests or some of the Black Panther rallies, when the police would come to break them up, what they were finding cannabis, they were finding psilocybin, they were finding LSD in these dirty hippies' pockets, And so they were like, what are we going to do? Okay, we're going to make them Schedule 1. And that's exactly what happened. So instead of them just breaking up these protests and these rallies and these, just people coming together and saying we're empowered to create change, they're putting them in prison.
Now all of a sudden they're possessing drugs.
Yeah, because they're possessing Schedule 1 drugs, right? So you're in prison. And in that time period, it went from something like 200,000 people being incarcerated to like 2.3 million in an extremely short period of time. Half of those people were for drugs. And 2/3, like most of them were African Americans. So in that time period, you have these jails that are becoming privatized. And then people are like, great, we want to fill up our new, our new business model. Yeah. So this is what was happening. And let's be clear, it didn't just stop with like the Nixon administration and Hoover. Bill Clinton signed a law that was basically like, it was the violent drug, anti-act, like trying to still put millions of dollars into going after these violent criminals. I mean, it's insane. So people act like, it was back then. It's been ongoing. It's been ongoing. And so all the research that was happening and all of these, actual movements that were going on were completely eradicated. And it wasn't until 1999 that there in the new research with John Hopkins, who were studying people who were giving them larger doses of psilocybin as end of life treatment, helping them be able to deal with their anxiety. Not until it was basically, there was basically like a 20-year hiatus where everything was shut down. And you see this movement now beginning to explode with things like maps. There's so many organizations now that are really going in and going after the research. So it's pretty fascinating to see where the feds were eradicating these societies, eradicating these movements. And with this new turning, people are like, wait a second, I could microdose.
Yeah.
I could do this during my day. Like, that's a radical shift in consciousness.
Yeah. And first of all, thank you for that whole educational piece. Really, really appreciate it. Something that I'm thinking through is obviously psilocybin isn't new to the 50s, 60s, and quote unquote counterculture. It's been around for many years, many cultures, many civilizations. It's been a tool. There's ayahuasca. There's all of these like really powerful, potent plant medicines that have been used so beautifully in ceremony. And our current cultural awareness kind of rests in that 60s, 70s. Oh, this is a drug. This is illegal. This is bad. This is harmful. We go to jail for this. And it's so painful to think about because the history of this medicine is so loving and nurturing, and it's deep, but it's interpersonally deep. You're going on this journey. You don't hear stories of people on ayahuasca then trying to go steal from someone or whatever. They're doing their own thing. They're in their own space and their own depths. And so what's interesting now is kind of the access way today is really kind of because of academia, like starting with, John Hopkins and now MAPS. We have these organizations that are like, oh, this is academic research. And now we're scientists, so we can do this. And so I want to give power back to people and coaches that have the best intention, which is another piece to the story. But it's a self-empowering tool, and you don't need the academics to tell you everything about it. Of course, go be informed, work with a coach, do the proper protocol for yourself. But yeah, I'd love for you to touch on that, like that self-empowering and that community aspect of it, rather than it's academic, therefore we're good to go.
Right. We don't need scientific world to validate what's been used as a potent tool for thousands of years. Who knows how long, actually. And let's give ancestral credit to the people who have been doing this and didn't need to research it per se. Didn't need to run it through their academia to make sure it's okay to use. With that, Maria Sabina, who's in Mexico, a woman is who shared this with, this white anthropologist from the States who came and was like, what is this? What is this that's happening here, with these indigenous peoples? It's like, yeah, she was a healer, right? And she was using psilocybin, to help heal the people, right? And he took it and he was like, oh, okay, wow. And then when he went back to the States, and that was in 57, Harvard found out and they were like, whoa, wait a minute, we all need to try this. And that's really what fueled it, right? So I find it fascinating that psilocybin was handed over from a woman, right? And then had this sort of route into the Americas. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, we need to study it. We don't need to put our academic stamp of approval on it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying go forage in the woods or, whatever, just some random thing. Always use caution and intuition. But we know what it does. We know it works. And so this sort of Western mind of the ego needing to break it all down and know that we did this and it does this and we can predict this over time. It's guess what? What happens in a lab versus the forest or in your day-to-day life is going to be completely different, because we know that the environment has an effect on the outcome. And that is something that is very difficult to study when we're talking about the energetics or the frequency, which is not being studied in a lab. However, it's being highly worked with when you're talking about a curandera, when you're talking about a shaman, when you're talking about someone who's working with the energetics specifically. So again, it's sort of the immaturity of the Western world when it's just like, oh, we're going to get to the root of this and we're going to find out. It's like, you know what? Go have an experience and then you're going to find out. And to me, having the people that are like, you know what? I have the courage to do this. I trust this. I'm listening to my natural, my intuition. I'm listening and I'm being called in. And so I just say to those of you who are curious, come in, ask some questions, get informed. Your natural innate wisdom is what this movement is all about.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. And again, to hit on that point that this is a non-addictive, you mentioned withdrawal symptoms with the older population. But in general, it's not like taking I don't even want to name a drug and compare it to, but it's your body is not going to shut down from being depleted of this. There's no come down. There's no craziness that comes from taking this.
Because it's such a small amount, right? It's such a small amount. It's just like, if you have a dropper full of water and then all of a sudden, you don't have it. It's like, you might not notice as much. It's like if you're drinking like 8 glasses a day and then you're not drinking 8 glasses a day, that's different. We're talking about a micro amount. And that should speak volumes to people of how powerful this is, because you're getting a frequency into your body, right? That's all it is. When we get down to it, it's a frequency, and it's helping you adjust your frequency, your heart frequency, your authentic frequency. And so you don't need a lot. And again, that's why I love microdosing, because it's a micro amount. So do more with less.
Do more with less. That's the name of this episode. I love it.
Micro changes, micro results.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I did want to ask you, and this might be from conversations earlier and more kind of in that just understanding microdosing 101. A question for you is about strains as well as who you're working with and how you're sourcing this coaching and this healing wisdom. That we can separate that if you like. Yeah.
So, when people ask questions about strains, just remember this is a super small amount. Even though there are notable strains that are much stronger than others. When people are doing these protocols, they will tend to use strains that are not quite as strong. But again, when it's a micro amount, the strain quite possibly is making very little difference. Now, what I would say is these are living beings. I mean, mushrooms are alive and they're super smart. They're not plants and they're not animals, but they're quite possibly aliens, because there is a rumor that they came in on an asteroid and then basically created life on Earth. Whatever it may be, they are alive and they do absorb the atmosphere of where they're grown and who's taking care of them. So if anything, the energetics of the grow and how they are handled and treated is of major concern. And that is what can be important. And I know it's really getting into the weeds with it. A lot of people may not be able to find out, but this is why it can be very helpful to ask someone who has experience what that could look like when they're getting information on those things. And again, this is why working with a coach or a guide or someone can be very helpful, because you're going to have a very optimized experience.
Yeah, amazing. And just like a tip that you have for people seeking this and seeking the right coach on like how to connect, how to kind of discern who they're working with and that person's background.
This is an interesting question. And for some people, it gets a little tricky, because it's like, where do you find a coach who also has experience, in this world? And that's where the work that I do is rather unique, because I tell people, I work as a micro coach. I'm a mindset coach, but I'm a microdosing educator. It's not a requirement. for people to have their own protocol going on to work with me. They definitely can ask me questions regarding that to become more educated. But it is really tricky. So, as this is growing in awareness and popularity, you're going to see more people who are in this space, but look for someone who can talk to you and do, let's just say like a discovery call to help understand what your intentions are around this type of process. Somebody's like, yeah, just come and work with me. You want someone to interview you so that they understand your needs and can their experience match your needs, right? So be sure that the person that you're working with, it's like, what is their background? Do they have experience, in plant medicine communities? Like, what does that look like? How long has it been? What do their clients say? Who do they work with? With this, even though microdosing can be a tool for many people, how, the intention going in is really important. So you want to look for a coach or a therapist or, a guide asking you questions around, what are your intentions? What's your experience with this? What type of medications are you on? What's your intention with like self-development work? These types of things. So really be thorough and just keep looking and trust your gut.
Ooh,
When you
yeah.
feel it, just trust yourself. And it's like, you know what? I'm feeling, this person is the person. Okay, reach out and schedule a call. Trusting yourself is the first part of this process.
I love that. I love that. And I think it's all important what you just said. It's you're meeting with them, they're asking you questions that make you feel seen and validated. And oh, this person can support me. This person gets it. They're not just trying to sell me something. And that's that gut instinct. And that might take a discovery call. You might be more intuitive and be like, I just know this is it. I trust it. It's great. And like we're saying in this whole conversation, it's subperceptive. It's not going to bring you crazy places. So if you trust and you feel good, amazing. And if you don't, also amazing. Listen to that.
Yeah, don't feel like you won't find the right person. I mean, that's one of those things. Be persistent. Be persistent.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, okay, there's lots of people out there who will support you. And that's why, we're sharing this information. I mean, the big piece here is to get this into public awareness so that people realize like, oh, I can ask those questions. It's like, yes, you can. You can literally educate yourself about microdosing and psilocybin. Michael Pollan wrote a book on it. It's a New York Times bestseller, How to Change Your Mind. He talks all about psychedelics. And the guy, he's not in jail and he's not going to jail. So this is one of those things where don't let this vilification that was started, back then get to you now. We are breaking free. So many people are waking up, they are becoming more aware, and they're becoming more empowered. And so we're here to help you realize how powerful you truly are.
I love that. Thank you for bridging that so beautifully. And I find, just having these conversations, listening to them, tuning in, when you're aware of what's available and you're open to it, it kind of finds you. It's really cool how this energetic space works. And just that openness, just that awareness, you'll find your source, you'll find your person, you'll find your medicines. They're all tools and we're all here to support each other. So it's all out there.
Absolutely. It will find you. Put your curiosity beacon on, open your heart. It will find you. And thank you for summarizing it up in that way.
I appreciate you so much. And this whole conversation, I want it to go on forever. I'm curious, Aya, where people can find you and your work and connect with you.
So anyone could find me on my website. It's ayaallison.com. It's AYAALLISON.com. That's also my Instagram. I believe it's aya.allison. You can find me there. Those are probably the two best places to find me. And ask me anything. If you have questions, there's no bad questions. There's only, curious questions. So I'm here to help people educate themselves in a more fulfilled and sustainable way. Because there's lots of crazy information that's out there. But I can just say, my company's done research for about 4 years, and it is going to be studied by 2 different universities. So I'm not here to just give you Reddit information, find Reddit, not disparaging it, but it's like sometimes there's wild information out there. So if you want great information that's been studied and proven, I'm happy to give it to you.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that's like when you're feeling sick and you're on WebMD and you're just like, oh, I have every disease under the sun. Great.
Yeah.
But we've said it here. It's find those sources that you trust that you can lean on for this. And there is beautiful wisdom. It is a beautiful tool. And there's a lot of debunking that needs to happen because of its history in the US. Well, thank you so, so much. Really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, again, always happy to have these conversations. Anytime you want to have a chat, we can drop back in and, see what's going on. There's always updates happening. We didn't even really get into what's going on in the US in terms of decriminalization and all of these things. So there's always exciting things happening, research, legislation, etc. The movement is really ramping up.
Yeah, that is true. I know Oakland within California has its own kind of system right now with religious affiliation. It's a way to kind of get access to psychedelics, but in general, there's a lot of shaking happening in this space.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's great topics to cover. So anytime you want to drop back in, I'm sure we can spend another hour dropping a whole lot of knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
All right. Bye.
Bye.